So thanks everyone for joining our user group here in July. We have all of our socials posted here. The best way to reach us is through our website, and we have a newsletter on there that will inform you of any kind of sessions that we have coming up, as well as the ability to register for these events. So with you today, my name is Dimitri Arapettit. I'm one of the organizers, and with me I also have Bill Gunning, who's helping me out and helping run this user group. So Bill, say hi.
Hey.
All right, so we're going to go through our standard agenda where we'll start with some updates since the last time that we've met. We'll talk a bit about the latest and greatest coming around. We'll go into our featured presentation, and then we'll have a few closeout slides, including if anyone's looking for work or looking to hire. In case you missed the session last month, Karen did a phenomenal presentation about migrating to Stream using the Stream migration tool. As many of you know, Stream is going away in less than a year. So if you have Stream classic videos, you should start making a plan as soon as possible. This video is available on our YouTube channel, so definitely take a look if you're interested. All right, updates since last time. So I think one of the biggest updates came out earlier this week, which was the pricing for Microsoft 365 Copilot. Ouch! So Copilot is currently in a paid early access preview program with 600 enterprise clients, where they're really kicking the tires and starting to iron out any kind of challenges. But Microsoft has announced that this will become a public preview later this year at a price point of $30 per user per month. We don't have enough time today to really dive into what Copilot is, so if you haven't seen it, we will likely plan a session at some point this year to really deep dive into all the different functionality. But it's more than just ChatGPT inside your environment. This is truly searching and indexing all of your M365 content, and then building an additional AI layer on top of that. That's pretty cool. So another pretty big update that came out yesterday was the announcement of Bing Chat Enterprise. So we've all heard of ChatGPT, and we all have heard the horrors of people putting confidential information into ChatGPT online, and then that getting leaked because it's used to train the models. So you put some sensitive documents in there, and then somebody else asks a question that your document had the answer to, it could serve it up to your competitors. Samsung had a pretty famous data breach recently because of that. I'm sure there's been countless others. So what this does is this takes that whole GPT model and it gives you that enterprise-grade security strictly within your tenant. So nothing that you put in here will be used to train models, not inside your tenant, not outside your tenant. So it's a very secure way for you to use the GPT model as you would ChatGPT, but inside of your environment. And then most importantly, this is rolling out at no cost. If you have an M365 E3, E5 license or business standard or business premium. So I think for most of the users in our user group, you would have this included. And in the future, if somebody doesn't have these licenses and they're on a more basic level, there will be a separate SKU available. So another update, Azure Active Directory is being renamed to Entra ID. So Microsoft Entra is their whole suite of identity products that includes much more than just Azure AD, but Azure AD is now being rebranded as Entra ID. And they're going to keep the same SKUs, they're just going to rename them. And we have a brief table here showing what the new SKUs will be called. Like with any Microsoft rename, it's going to take some time for all of the labels and documentation and actual license names to be updated to reflect the new name. But keep an eye out, that's coming over the course of this year.
Dimitri, I have a question on this.
Good.
Right now, I'm working on a website, and supposedly I'm going to use Azure Active Directory as the authentication and the authorization provider tonight. Mm-hmm. So does like /AAD, that syntax still work, or it will be like /Entra ID?
Yeah, good question. The question is someone in the room is building an application and asking about changes to potential endpoints for the APIs. It's a great question. I don't think Microsoft has announced anything along those lines yet. They have said that they're not breaking any functionality. They've announced that the feature sets are going to be exactly as they are today. So my guess is that they probably will keep that as is, and maybe the next version of the APIs, they will change the path to.
So
So my active Azure Directory URL yesterday changed in my private tenant.
Okay.
It became entry yesterday. I don't know.
Deb, did your API endpoints change as well?
I don't know because I don't use them, but I just noticed the URL changed yesterday.
Yeah, so I don't think Microsoft's going to break the millions of integrations with Azure AD because of this rebranding. So I wouldn't worry about it. And this is going to take place over the course of the rest of the year. So there'll be a lot more announcements if there are breaking changes. And Microsoft typically gives you at least a year, if not more, when it, if there is a breaking change for you to be able to plan for it. All right, another reminder we want to throw out there. So in 90 days, Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2 are going to be end of life permanently. They're currently in the extended support cycle, meaning they're going to address security updates through that date. Once we hit October 10th, you're completely dead in the water for security enhancements and protection. So if you haven't planned for getting off of some of these legacy systems, now is a very good time to start planning. Another update, so many of you have probably seen Twitter in the news in the last several months, and all sorts of changes coming to Twitter. It got to the point where you can't see tweets unless you're actually logged in, and then there was limits on how many you could view a day, depending if you had a blue check mark or a gray check mark. I haven't followed all the details, but it caused the SharePoint Twitter web part to break. And a lot of our clients and a lot of our members here have the Twitter web part on your internet homepage because it was a really easy way to make dynamic content appear without having to do a whole lot of work. So the web part's broken, and Microsoft's position is that we can't really do anything about it. This is the third party deciding they don't want to support this. So if you have that and you haven't noticed it yet, you probably want to take that off of your internet. If you have seen it and you want to replace it with something else, there's always the option to look at third-party options for LinkedIn or other social media feeds where your companies are probably also posting to already. So as we mentioned briefly with the last month's presentation, so Stream Classic is retiring. However, the end date has been pushed out by a couple of months. So previously it was going to be sunset in February of next year, and now it's going to be in April. I think part of this was a point that Karen touched on last month where there was actually a bug in the migration tool that caused some scenarios to not migrate or not have the metadata come across. So because of that, Microsoft promised a patch. That patch got delayed, and basically to make up for that lost time, they're giving us a little bit more runway. So another update here is the new Microsoft Teams client. Has anyone in the room been using the preview version of Teams? Okay, a few people dabbling with it. I've been using it exclusively just to eat, the upcoming dog food. And I think it's pretty great. It's snappy, it's fast. Switching context between tenants takes like
tenants is awesome.
half a second instead of like the 5 to 10 seconds it would normally take. But that being said, Microsoft is starting to plan to roll it out to the entire sphere as a new standard. So starting later this month, Microsoft's going to start showing that toggle on most environments. You, of course, have the ability to block this through policy. But if you leave your settings as default, by the end of this year, this is the new Teams app is going to be the default app that will be launched, and your users won't be asked to switch between them. Yes.
Just a minor rabbit hole, but my favorite feature in the new Teams is not only, as you mentioned, the really fast tenant switching, but also when you're in another tenant, you get alerts when there were messages from the other tenants.
That's pretty
Which is brand new, and there was never any solution for that before, and it was a nightmare. So it's awesome.
How's it on the Mac? I've tried it on the Mac, but then a little bit unsuccessful.
I'll have to try it.
I did.
We don't
Well,
know.
I did both just to see how they worked, and quite frankly, the Windows is superb. The Mac is still a little rough in terms of switching and stuff. So
I have done the Mac.
Great question, Tim. Just looking around the room, I don't think anyone's had experience with the Mac version yet, myself included. But if Microsoft's getting ready to start rolling this out, I'm guessing there's going to be a lot more work being put into smooth out those edges. All right, so there's a new Viva Suite application. So if you're licensed for the $9 per user per month Viva Suite license, there's a new feature coming called Viva Pulse. Microsoft demoed bits of this during the last Ignite conference in the fall. And essentially, this gives you a quick way to get a pulse on your teams. So today, we could all go into Microsoft Forms and brainstorm some questions to ask our teams, like, do you feel our weekly cadence meetings are effective? How do you feel about the status of this? What are your biggest concerns? But no one has time to do that. So with Viva Pulse, you're going to have a new ability within the Teams interface to be able to go and send a pulse where you can select who's going to be sent to, whether it's just your immediate team or distribution groups or what have you. And there's a bunch of predefined templates that they have already created for you. So you can get a very quick pulse on like how things are going on in your organization or your teams without having to actually put in the effort to go and decide what KPIs you want to track for a given project.
Question for you, Dimitri. Does that include that sentiment analysis? How do you feel today?
No, so that's part of Viva Insights.
That's your insight. Sorry,
Yeah, and Microsoft actually this week, it hasn't made it into these slides, but they have announced the new Glint app that's coming out as part of the Viva suite. I don't have too much details on that just yet, but I think that's going to be attached to Viva Insights. All right, thanks to Turn Digital for keeping the lights on. So we're ready for our main event. So we have a great presentation with Matt Jimson regarding harnessing the power of OpenAI inside of Power Virtual Agents. So Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just one more audio check because I did switch microphones. You still hear me okay?
That's great.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to kick it off and go ahead and share my screen really quickly. And I just want to thank Dimitri, the Boston User Group, everyone for allowing me to be here. It's awesome that you are all in Boston and I'm actually here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And so I do have a small part of the presentation for Slido. So that's on there on the screen right now. And then I also pasted the same code into the Teams chat. So I just have a few small polls. It's also going to be a great way for you to ask questions, and then we'll get to those at the end. So hopefully we can get a little bit of interaction. I will absolutely try to listen for any questions from the room and whatnot, but I also wanted to provide another mechanism for that to work as well. So we are here to talk about the power of OpenAI inside Power Virtual Agents, but first, I want to do a little bit of an introduction. So I got way back in the day, my Bachelor in Science in Computer Graphics Technology. I actually love that experience, really thinking about the front end of development instead of the back end initially, because that's really, I think, the experience that our end users relate to the most. And over the course of my career, I have done a variety of things, starting, as a developer, moving up to an architect, working as a consultant, and then even as a managing director. And so for the 7 years prior to the last year, I actually was running a Microsoft consultancy of a group of about 150 folks, and we had some other technologies involved in that group, but I really missed being hands to key, really missed it. And so I made the decision about a year ago, like, you know what, I'm not ready to be out of that game entirely. And so I made a jump back into really being sort of full-time developer architect. I took a position at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and now I'm the head of intelligent experiences, which is why I'm heavily involved in AI and Power Virtual Agents there, as well as custom Microsoft 365 apps. So all the different development experience that I talk about with the different languages and whatnot, that's really there. And back in the day in SharePoint 2007, which is when I got acquainted to SharePoint, I was really doing a lot of speaking back at SharePoint Saturdays. I'm sure a lot of people remember those. And so I was actually fortunate enough here in the last month to become a Microsoft MVP for the first time in my career for business applications and the work that I'm doing around primarily, again, Power Virtual Agents. And then that includes Power Automate and then Azure OpenAI as well. So that was very exciting. And then you can see on the screen, I have my Twitter handle, and then I've also got my website address as well. And I will be sharing a copy of the presentation when we're done, so not to worry. And I'll also be sharing the solution that we're going to be building tonight as well. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is just give a really high level, because we're going to spend a lot of time building hands-on instead of a lot of slides. We don't have a ton of slides to go through. We're going to go through three main areas, and we're going to talk about OpenAI. And I loved the comment earlier about OpenAI. Be careful what you put in there. It's actually a slide coming up in here too. I want to stress that you can do all of this with Azure OpenAI. At Takeda, personally, that's what we utilize. We don't utilize OpenAI, but because Azure OpenAI requires you to request usage and it requires you to get it tied to your subscription, there's a few more hoops to jump through. Chose to do this demonstration in OpenAI directly. But again, if you're saying, gosh, I don't want to use OpenAI, this is something if we did it at my company, there's no way that would fly. It is very, very similar. I will try to call out a few subtle differences on the two, but if you can do this with OpenAI, you can absolutely do this with Azure OpenAI. We're going to talk about Power Automate, and we're going to talk specifically about using those APIs because that's the main thing that we're going to be doing. Really, it's the only thing that we're going to be doing with Power Automate. And then we'll talk about Power Virtual Agents. And so with that, I actually wanted to jump really quickly to one of the first polls. So bear with me here. And the first question that I have for the group is around just OpenAI chat and images. And so wanted to see what is everyone's sort of experience with Azure, not Azure, but well, it could be both, right? But what do you know about OpenAI chat, images, etc.? How much has the group gotten a chance to sort of get their hands dirty with this technology? I'll just give it a few more seconds, and again, we'll have a couple more slides and polls as well, but just wanted to get a chance to see sort of where the group's at. Okay, so perfect. All right, so it seems like we've got a bit of a variety. It looks like novice is sort of where the majority of the group is landing, which is good. I think that helps essentially with what we're going to be covering today. If you're an expert, you may not learn new things unless you haven't done this specifically in Power Virtual Agents. And so with that, I actually want to go ahead and just jump to that same poll because I'm curious to see when we talk about Power Virtual Agents now moving over here, I was curious to see what has the group done with Power Virtual Agents, and that's going to be the vehicle for this. And so, what level of experience do you have? I think it's really a mixed bag. What I've seen across the board, I think licensing and costs are a concern for a lot of organizations, and because of that, there may be some familiarity, right, but not all the way there. So just looking at this, okay, it looks like it lands really well along with the OpenAI question, sort of kind of landing in that novice area. We've got some that have done nothing. That's awesome because we're just going to show through the presentation what Power Virtual Agents is. And we're going to be working with the Unified Canvas, which is the G8 is the de facto PVA solution now. So if you used it 6 months ago, it's going to look a little different. Frankly, it's going to be better. And that's really a marriage of the Azure Bot Composer framework and the original PVA Canvas coming together in the unified one. So thank you very much for that information. Just good to understand the audience and where you're at. So we're going to go ahead and jump back now to the presentation. So mentioned it before, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but again, yes, OpenAI has a statement in their terms that says that they can use your info to train their model. And so you want to be careful about what you're sharing there. Absolutely. So that goes for, if you want to put this demo together, yeah, I'll put the solution together as well afterwards and share that, but just keep that in mind. Okay, at a really high level, this is getting into the details where some of these things may or may not be needed. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but I want to give you at least a high level overview of what OpenAI does and these models do. With OpenAI, we'll say one main difference between Azure OpenAI and OpenAI. OpenAI has a lot more models available, but big asterisk, Microsoft is bringing additional models into Azure. So this will change over time. We're talking about chat and images. Completions was sort of the predecessor to chat, was more of a single query. But if you're doing embeddings, which is creating vector points for content, if you're doing audio translations, if you're doing files with your custom fine tuning or moderations and edits on text, those are additional things that are available in OpenAI. We're going to do absolutely nothing with any of them except the two that are in bold. And then I want to share some details on the API. Again, to do this, we're going to have to call the API. Now, the reality is there is a ChatGPT preview plugin for AI Builder. You could certainly try to leverage that. It's going to be tricky because of the way the model works. We've actually built out custom connectors too to utilize directly with this as well. So that's something you may eventually want to move to so that your end users aren't having to deal with HTTP requests and body posts. But specifically, we're going to declare the model. This is one key difference between Azure and OpenAI. Azure, you deploy the model and becomes part of the URL path. In this particular one for OpenAI, it is a part of the post body that we send. Slight difference. The messages is an array of the conversation. This was a huge surprise to people that I've talked to. Chris Kent, somebody that I work with at Takeda, and saying, are you kidding me? Like, I have to store the whole message and then I have to send all of the conversation? Yes, you do. It does not retain that. So you've got to make sure that you're compiling all of the users' queries and the bot's responses, because if you don't and you send that back, then you're not going to have a full picture. The temperature is going to, at a really high level, determine how crazy or wild or creative we let the bot get. We're normally going to set that at 0. It could go from 0 to 2. In OpenAI, it goes from 0 to 1. In Azure OpenAI, again, small differences. Top P is similar, but a little bit different. But again, you're going to be told to use one or the other. Again, think of these two as really controlling how different types of responses you might get. N is the number of responses. You're almost always going to ever get one. And so with that, we're not going to change it. Stream, we're not going to work with. That's not going to work well with PVA, but to be able to start getting your response back into stream instead of all at once. Stop would allow you to specifically tell the bot when you encounter this text, I want you to stop and not respond anymore. Max tokens basically allows us to tell the bot how many tokens we want to use. Tokens are essentially the characters that we share, but they're not one-to-one. So one character is not equal to one token. It's relative. There's a formula on it, but there are also Python libraries and other things you can use if you want to get an exact count. And then presence penalty and frequency penalty is your opportunity. From a presence penalty, pump that up between 0 and 2. It tells the bot that you want more tokens or more variations of text. And then frequency penalty, you can penalize the appearance of words multiple times so that you don't get the same thing being repeated over and over and over again in the response. So that's what that looks like from a chat completion standpoint. Again, you have a lot of control. These are what I would say mostly advanced properties, except for the first 3. You have to choose a model. You have to send messages. Temperature, again, if I set that at 0, set that at 1, but you want to make sure you know sort of how wild things are going to get. The rest is up to you, but again, they're there if you need them. And then we're going to cover DALL-E tonight. We were really going to create a PVA bot in this conversation that's going to allow you to do both the text, and it's going to allow you to do the images. So there's DALL-E, your prompt, what kind of image are you doing? N is the number of images, and then you have 3 options for sizes, 256, these are squares, 5, 12, 10, 24. So you can pick how big it is. We're going to go small tonight just so we get quicker responses, but you have the option. Those things won't last forever, by the way. If after about an hour, those URLs, if you choose the response format URL, they're going to go away. So you will long-term want to think about the fact that whether you want to retain them or not. If you do, you're going to want to do something different, store them maybe in blob storage, SharePoint, et cetera, that you pick. But I wanted to point it out because those images will not live forever. And even if you're using Azure OpenAI, those images will still not live forever. And this is another subtle difference, maybe the last one I'll point out for you all. Azure OpenAI's DALL-E API is not as robust. One of the biggest problems with it is can only do 4 images, and it's actually sort of an asynchronous API. So you query it and you tell it, this is what I want you to create. It gives you back a new URL that you have to pull repeatedly to see when the images are done. And then that's going to require, it's really pretty simple to do in Power Automate, but it's going to require a little bit more work, and it's going to require a do until type loop so that you get it. With DALL-E on OpenAI, you're going to say, here's my request, and it's going to say, here's your response. That's it, which again works super well with Power Automate and what we're going to be doing there. Okay, so now because of that, we're going to actually jump in and we're going to take a look specifically at some of these things I just covered quickly on OpenAI. So jump over to the browser. Okay, so this is OpenAI, and let's see here. Is everyone, I'm going to make sure. Is everyone actually seeing the OpenAI documentation here? Okay, perfect.
A little small.
Okay, I will fix that. Thank you. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So a few things. One, if you wanted to create an OpenAI account, I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new window here. If you go to openai.com, you go to sign up. You're going to have different options here as far as whether you want to create a new account directly with them or you want to continue with Google, Microsoft, or Apple. But that's what you're going to want to create to be able to do the things that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to go ahead and kill that for now. I'm actually logged into my account right here. You can see that. This is where you've got your overview, documentation, API reference, examples of Playground. This is all of the information I just covered and more. So this goes through all of the different models and all the different capabilities. Highly recommend looking at that, especially if you're not sure exactly which one of these things does. Now, examples is pretty cool because we get just a whole list of things that you can do. And I can actually look at one of these and I can say, okay, I think this sounds good. I want to open it in the playground. And what happens is then I'm going to be able to open this in something that allows me to go ahead and just start adding messages. And so if you're wanting to play around and immediately start seeing, this is really similar to OpenAI's chat with all the controls on the right side. And for anyone who's used Azure OpenAI, it's also really similar. It looks a little bit different, but it's really honestly very close. So this is going to give you the ability to play around. And if you're trying to sort of understand what's the right prompt, this is a great way to do that. The other thing that we're going to play with a little bit tonight is the system message. It's a special message where you're essentially giving the bot instructions on how it should behave. We're going to do something with that, really relatively small. But otherwise, there are three types of messages. There's the system, the user, and the assistant. So it's primarily just the conversation between the user and the assistant with the initial system message saying, this is what I want you to do. So that is at a high level, essentially what what OpenAI looks like. And again, highly recommend taking a look at API references and the playground as well. All right, back to the presentation. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about Power Automate and why are we looking at a sandwich? Because I like to think of Power Automate and PVA working together as creating a great sandwich. And what I mean specifically by that is Power Virtual Agents is going to provide information to Power Automate, right? That's the top. There are only three kinds of information we can give it. We can give it text, yes, no, number. That's it. The great thing about text is you can cast that to other things. So if you're thinking, wow, I'll never be able to send it an array or an object, you can. You're just going to have to do additional casting there. The reason I call it a sandwich is that so everything we bring in and then everything we bring back, but all of the things that happen in between the time PVA contacts Power Automate and the time that it returns something, that's up to us, right? That's where we get to have a lot of fun. That's where we can use premium actions. That's where we can talk to SharePoint, talk to Dataverse, talk to HTTP models like we're going to be doing here in a bit. But that's really at a high level what Power Automate does really well. And again, for thinking back to some of the people that are newer to PVA, I like to call Power Automate really the magic behind PVA. It's the primary means of being able to interact with other systems. Obviously, we're going to be eventually getting generative actions and plugins and things like that, and that will do some of those same things. But this is really the way to do it, and so we will do a few of these builds in the demo. Okay. We will actually take a look at that when we get to the demo. Let's go ahead and really quickly jump over to PVA first. And want to talk about a few things. Number one, when we're building a premium bot, if we were trying to get away without doing premium, we would be doing PVA for Teams. If we were doing PVA for Teams, we couldn't use premium actions like HTTP. So that's just out altogether. Because we're going to create the bot in the web UI, and I will tell you all, if you don't have PVA premium, that's fine. You can get a trial. Right now, there's no limit on the trial, so you can continue to extend your trial. So if you go to the web UI, you'll be able to do that. But every time you create a bot, it's going to start out by default as being open and anonymous. We're going to set ours to Teams only so that we can deploy it via Teams. That's the idea. You could do different things with it if you wanted to, though, but that's how we're going to do it. The topics are the individual things that we decide to build where we want to trigger conversations based on what the user is entering. And then the fallback topic, which is critical to this, is sort of the catch-all. It's the, I have no idea what you just asked, and so I'm going to go send this over to OpenAI to get an answer. And then we're also going to talk about variables, topic versus global being something that can persist in the session, topic being just within the session, or within the topic rather. Sessions in a whole, those are typically going to be 30-minute sessions. Microsoft provides good definitions on what a session is, especially from a billing capacity. But essentially, if someone is going to be talking for a really long time and submitting a lot of data, it could go into multiple sessions, or again, if they're leaving it open. And then we're going to look at basic cards, adaptive cards, and quick replies. Those are sort of some of the other things that are new in PVA. Couldn't do those easily in the 1.0 version that you can do now. All right, so we're going to jump out now of the PowerPoint, and we're going to go ahead and go directly into PVA. I chose to do this for a reason. We are literally creating it all from scratch right now. We have one done that we can pull out of the oven if we need to and we run out of time, but I really wanted to give you a chance to see just how easy it is to do. I've got a little bit of a cheat sheet, a text that I can copy paste some formulas and whatnot. That'll make it easier, but you're going to see us doing it. And I want to show you how quick it is to actually create a new bot. So this is something that Microsoft's also continuing to improve. But for anybody that had worked with it in the past, even a few months ago, like the time that we just saw is quite a bit better than what it used to be. So that is one thing I wanted to point out. Okay, so we're going to do a few things initially here. One, we're going to just create a new topic.
So Matt, real quick, we're seeing just a blank screen.
Okay. Oh, it looks like I stopped sharing. Thank you for letting me know.
All right, we're back.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and create a new topic, go from blank. We're seeing this a little bit larger, so the UI looks a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and call this topic chat. And that's all we're actually going to do. And we're just going to go ahead and save it for now, which essentially say, well, what have we done? We've done nothing. We're also going to go ahead and go back to topics, and we're going to create another one, and we're going to call it image. And those are the only two things we're going to be doing any much work at all, I would say, tonight. Now with image, we are going to go ahead and change its actual phrases because we're going to say, we call this bog bot for Boston Office Group, and we're just going to say bog image is the phrase that we want to light this up, and we're going to save it. Again, we won't do anything with it for right now. So far, not much going on, but there's a reason why we've created those separately. Now we're going to go over to system topic. And when we do that, we're going to see fallback. And again, this is the topic that gets called when nothing else matches, which is what's going to happen the majority of the time in this kind of conversation with generative AI. Now, normally it's trying to determine how many times it's failed to find a topic, and it's going to do all this other work and lesson theory and all that, but we don't want any of that because we want to do something custom. So we're just going to delete it all entirely. The next thing that we're going to actually do in here, and I will explain to you why I'm doing this, is we're going to see here. I'm going to have to zoom out here. Okay. Is we're going to go to another topic, and we're actually just going to go to the chat topic that we had created earlier. The reason for this, I've seen this on one occasion, and granted, the unified canvas is very new, but I've seen this fallback topic get corrupted before and doing all of the work in it. And this really is just sort of a good module pattern where everything we're going to do with the chat is here. So if the fallback topic gets triggered, it's going to go ahead and call our topic, but there's not much else that's actually going on with it. It's just a means to get the user there. Okay, so that's it. That hooks that up. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our chat topic. And so right now we've got nothing going on. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is we want to create, let me go zoom out again, create a variable. And so we'll say variable, set a variable value, and we're going to call this variable chat. And then we're actually going to make this a global variable. So you can see global.chat has no value yet. That's where I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet that I mentioned. And what we're going to do, can someone throw out like a character, movie character, famous person, somebody with a unique personality?
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Okay. Am I spelling that right?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll go with it. So this is the system role that I mentioned to you. So you're a helpful assistant who talks like Jean-Claude Van Damme and answers questions. You don't provide intentionally false information. So we're just going to grab this right here, and we're going to go back to PVA, and we're going to go ahead and set it to that. This is a string right now. That's all we're doing. Okay. Now we're going to do something that might seem like a little bit tricky. I'm going to check this zoom here. So now we're going to do something a little bit weird, right? The variable's already been created, but we don't actually want to continually set it here because we might have a conversation going on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say add a condition, and then we're going to say if this variable is blank, then we're going to do something. Now if we're going to go down here, we're going to select it. We're going to cut it. We're going to freak this out because it's now all of a sudden the variable that it's checking for doesn't exist. And we're going to paste it in here. What we just did really simply is we said, more or less, if this is a new conversation, go ahead and put in this initial message. That's all that is. Okay, the next thing that we're going to actually do is we want to go ahead and work with that again as far as that variable. And so we're going to go back again, set a variable again, and we're going to look at global.chat. Pick that, and then again, I'm going to pick a cheat sheet here really quickly. And what we are going to do essentially is the user just entered something into the chat. They just asked a question. They just wanted to do something. So we're going to go here. We're going to go over to formula. And again, this is another newer part of the PVA Unified Canvas being able to use PowerFX. And we're going to paste this in. And all we're doing is we're saying we already have a chat, right? And again, whether it was we just entered the new system message or we actually have a conversation, we had it, we're going to add something else to it. The roles of the user because the user is asking it. The content is the system.activity.text. That's the text that's coming in from the fallback topic. We're going to replace single apostrophes so that we don't get invalid JSON. And then we're going to add a comma to the end of that. You can work with the comma and determine whether or not you need to add it based on the first item or whatnot. For simplicity's sake, we're just always going to put one at the end, which means we have an extra one that we don't need. But we're going to go ahead and insert that. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do, and this is one of slightly a little bit more involved, and again, we're going to deal with Power Automate, is we're going to go down here and we're going to say we want to call an action, and we're going to create the flow. Okay, and then we can click on this, and we'll say we'll call it Bob Chat. And the thing that we're going to do here is we are going to give it the message. Right, so this is all the content that's coming in. You have these conversations. We'll talk about storing the responses, so you'll see that too. And then what we're going to give back to it is actually the response. So that's what it is, message in, response out. So the whole array in, and then the result of this particular thing here out. So we're going to need to call, like I said, an HTTP action. And so we have an API key that we got from OpenAI. This would be very similar if you were trying to do the same thing with Azure OpenAI. And so going to go ahead and load that. It's my OpenAI API key. This is a really quick little Power Automate trick for anybody who's not seen this before. This is the kind of value that I don't want people going back in history and being able to see, because otherwise somebody that has access to see this, then that has my key and can do whatever they want with it. So I'm actually going to click on the dots on that. And then on the secure outputs, I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I want to secure the outputs of this. What this means is no one's going to be able to see that key anymore. Well, it's still going to work perfectly fine for us in the HTTP action, but nobody's going to be able to come in here and look at the results and see that key, which is what we like. So now we're going to look for HTTP, and we are going to go ahead and go with the HTTP action. We'll pick that. Again, this is premium, like we talked, PVA's premium. This mechanism is premium. It is going to be a post, just so we're going to do that. Then we're going to go ahead and pick a few more things here. Number one, we're talking about chat. So let's go ahead and put in this chat URL. Again, this came from all of that OpenAI stuff that I had shown earlier. We're going to go ahead and say the application content type, application JSON. We're going to also do authorization, and it's going to be bearer space, and then it's going to be that particular value that we got. So we can put that in there. And then next, we're going to get into the body. And this is where, again, I'm going to go ahead and steal from myself. And so what we're looking at is this, and I'll explain exactly what it is in a second. So I'm going to paste that in there. Here's what we're doing. We're saying we want GPT-3.5 Turbo 613. So this is a newer version model of it. To use GPT-4, you actually have to have had some payments processed or whatnot. I just set this up here within the last week, so this one is available to us, and so we'll do that. And then we've got messages, which I say X, and that is obviously not what we want. We want something specifically. We want it to be dynamic. And so for that, we are going to pull up this, and I will also explain what we are doing here in a second. So we're going to go over to expressions, and we are going to paste that in. And if you look at this here, we're basically saying we're going to take the left bracket, because this is an array of messages. Like that's what it expects, not a string. It expects an array and then a right array. But in between it, we're taking in that text. That trigger body text is the first variable that came in, which was our message. It's the only one here, so it doesn't matter. Those are always named text 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if you're wondering what that is, the other thing that we're doing is we're taking the entire length of it -1 essentially, because of the fact that I mentioned we always have a hanging comma. So we're just knocking that hanging comma out there. So at this point now we've told it, we've connected to the API, we've gotten our content type, we've gotten our authorization so that we're able to call the API, we've chosen our model, our messages, we're saying temperature is 0. And again, you see we talked about a ton of other things that you can pass. You don't have to do that though. So now that we have that, we want to actually get the value from it, right? Because it's going to come back here. And so let's go ahead and do a variable. And we're going to go ahead and just call this response. And it's going to be a string. And its value is going to be another one from our little cheat sheet. So take a look at this. So it is the body of that HTTP action, right? It's the entire response coming back to us from OpenAI. It is specifically the choices property within it. It's the first one. Remember I talked about in back a while ago. This is one of those things that drives you crazy. You almost never see a scenario where you're trying to get multiple responses back, but because of that, you've got this array there, which can make it tricky. In Power Automate, we're just saying get the first one. It's the message object in it, and it's actually the content property coming from it. So normally what I do, I would say to use scopes, try catches, all of that error handling here. But again, from a time perspective, we're trying to fly, so we're going to go a little bit quicker. But if this worked correctly, we essentially have a way to pass in the conversation. And then the last thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and output that, which we're going to have to do. So we're going to go back here and we're going to look for a response. All right. And that's, like I said, that's our sandwich basically, right? We sent something in and we're going to get something out. Wait for this to save. We're going to go back here. It's going to tell us, oh, something's changed, which it has, right? Because now we have another new flow. And so we're going to choose bot, which is the one that we just made. What we want going into it is our chat. And then what we want coming out of it is the response, which is totally fine. And what we want to do, though, like I mentioned, we have to keep track of this conversation ourselves. So now we need to take the response that came back and we need to add it here. So we're going to go again to the formula. It's going to look almost identical to the last one that we did, except this one is going to involve the response instead of the text that triggered the topic. So we're going to go over here. We're going to go and enter that. So again, concat the rest of the chat, the role, the assistant, because this is their response to the query. Got to do, again, the apostrophe replacement so that we don't get anything broken there. And then the hanging apostrophe, and then that's it. Other thing that we would want to do is we would want to actually output the message to the user in the chat. And to do that, we literally just want the response. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask? Just a question, could be about history, sports, entertainment.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, we'll start with one.
So first thing, I look at this, it gives me an impression of Azure Logic Apps. And the Power Automate. Is this like the same designer view?
I mean, that was Power Automate. That literally was Power Automate. When I was over here, like that is Power Automate. So yeah, if it looks like Power Automate and Azure Logic Apps, that's because it is 100%. Which is awesome, because if you haven't done anything with PVA, once you understand sort of how to manage the variables and what somebody's entering and then what you want to output, everything that you would need to do logically with Power Automate, you can do. So you could start to build simple workflow processes. Say you have a SharePoint list or a request list. Somebody enters a request, wants to check status of the request, update a request, things like that. And honestly, you can end up doing a lot of that with Power Automate as well. So yes.
Okay. Matt, I have a question. How long is a piece of string?
Okay. Okay, now over on the right, you're actually seeing it follow essentially. So it's like, okay, it just got here, and my friend, the length of piece of string is infinite as possible as universe. Does this sound like Jean-Claude Van Damme? I don't know. Let's see. It doesn't. Okay. All right, that's fine. So now let's ask. I want to show you that it's a conversation. I'm not sure what to ask about that. Again, I'm going to say, who are the top 5 point guards of all time? Now, one of the things on the older PVA that was interesting with the bot composer framework, you could actually set something to show a typing message when things were happening, because that could sort of get feedback that something's going on here. That's something I've requested they try to add back here. There are some typing delays and things like here that don't seem to work the same way. But anyways, okay, so we've got the top point guards of all time, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so now I can say, give me that list in a table format with name, birth date, and PPG career averages, please. Right, so that list, obviously, there's no context. If the conversation isn't a part of it, then that list would mean nothing to someone. So we'll go ahead and see what it comes back with. All right, and it comes back with that. So look, here's our table for certainly my friend, and I think we've got the wrong person in here, but that's cool. Jean-Claude, I probably typoed it. So we've got Magic Johnson birthday, PPG career averages. So we have a working ChatGPT with text. So that's it. That was how easy it was to do that particular thing. All right, so the next thing, and I think this is a little bit more fun, is, okay, that's cool, but we talked about images. So now we want to actually go over back to our topics, and we want to do the images thing, right? So let's go ahead and open that up because we created it. Again, this one we want to trigger, right? You could also try to interpret, if you chose to do a fallback topic for both, you could parse or make a determination on whether you thought they wanted an image or you thought they wanted an answer, right? That, which again, is going to go beyond what we're trying to do tonight, but that is an option. Here we're saying you're specifically going to say bog image, and then at that point, we're going to do that. Okay. So here is the first thing we got to do. We have to ask the user. So please enter a description of the image you'd like me to create. And then identify, this is basically the variable type. And what we want it to be is we want it to be the user's entire response. So we're not trying to do anything fancy with it. Just we're gonna ask them this, they're gonna respond, and then we want to say the response is a variable, and we're just gonna call it image description. Okay. There's one really important thing here to do. If you forget this part, you may sort of, and this is a general PDA thing, and generally may go, what is going on? It never asks the question anymore. We have to go here to properties on the question and look at the question's behavior. And so what's going to happen is it's going to say, hey, normally it's trying to help you, and you might want to do this, right? Like if it's a sort of like you were asking somebody their first name, like you don't want to ask them their first name over and over again. But the default is that if I have an answer to this, then I don't want to ask you, I want to skip it. We want to ask every single time. We don't care if we have an answer because the answer is always going to be different. So again, sort of just another kind of a PVA 101 thing there, but we've got to make that change because we always want to make sure that it does at least ask. Okay. So now we have an image description coming from the user. And then so again, now we're going to call upon the superpowers of Power Automate. So we're going to create a new flow. We're ready. And now we're going to do bog image. Okay. And again, at a very high level, we're going to give it an image description. And we're going to output data. So this one is interesting because we're going to be getting back a list of URLs that we want to put into an adaptive card. Like I said, this one's a lot more fun and visual, but that's essentially what we want to do. Like we're going to have to parse that text out. But again, it's really simple. We can only use text, Boolean, and numbers when we're putting things in or out. So text string is going to be your de facto. So that's what we're going to do. Now, what we want to do is create an adaptive card that is going to have an image. And that image is also going to be able to where you can click on it, and then it's going to actually open up the image. And if I look at this, so I'm using the adaptive card designer, you can see that I'm trying to do an action.open URL, and then I just chose a random image on my blog. And so that's what's in there right now, right? We've actually got it set up to sample data editor here to actually just mark the payload up over. So if you look at this, we changed it to 1.4 version, and you can see the body is just a type image, right, which we got from Elements. It's stretched. That's what's going to make it is it's going to fill out the size essentially, and then you get a URL, right? And so this is what is great about PVA, right? You can go here, you can design it, right, with some static data and sort of get an idea of what you want to do. And that's what the point of this was. So done this a little bit earlier, and let's see, we'll go ahead and cancel on that. We don't need to worry about that, but let's go back now and finish up this. Okay. So we're going to do, again, another HTTP call. And it is going to be really similar to what we did before. And it's going to be a post. We also need to grab that key because we can't call it without it. Okay, so again, it's the same key, which is actually pretty nice, even though it's two different services. It's all part of OpenAI. And again, if we want to do this here with our setting, we want to say security outputs so that no one can read our secret code. All right, and then go back to the cheat sheet here for a minute. So this is the image one. Just look at these at a really quick level. You've got everything's V1, you got chat, and then completion, specifically image generation. So there are different things you can do with images. You can do edits and other things that we won't go into detail on, but there's more than what's there right now. Okay, so we are going to say constant type. Well, actually, we'll paste that URL here. And we'll say content type, again, application JSON. And then we're going to say authentication, var space, and then we need to get the value of that secret. Okay, so now we're looking pretty good. And then now we get to the body. Again, we're going to come back in here for a second and cheat, and we're going to grab this request, and we're going to say the prompt, which again is us describing the image that we want, and the number of images that we're going to get back, and then size. We're choosing sort of to meet in the middle here on 512 by 512. So the only thing I need to actually do to this to make it work with what we sent in here is going over here, and we want to look for that image description, and we want to make sure it landed in the middle of those quotes, which it did. So we're calling the images generations API. We've got our content type set, we've got our authentication set, we've got our set to post, our body with our prompts, and 4 images, 512 by 512. All right. Now what we want to do is, we talked about last time, right? We've got to give something back, and I talked about that data here. So now we're going to do another variable to grab all of that. Okay, so we're going to call it just data, and it's a string. And this one, we actually don't need to write any expressions. We're just going to give it the entire body. And for reference, let's go back here. Oops. Wanted to show you really quickly what that image looks like. Let me just back this out here. It's just too big, too small. Right. This is what we're getting back. Okay, we're getting an object, JSON object, that has a property called data. And all it is an array of objects with a URL property. So like this is essentially what we're looking for. And the particular flow, we're really not doing anything with it because we just want it back, because we're going to, again, parse it and do other cool things with it inside of PD. Okay, so now I go here, I say data. Again, I'm going to have to give it something back, and I'm going to give it back the data. Right. And now we're going to go ahead and save this. Okay, and now we're going to go back into PDA. We're going to call an action, and if we don't see it, it's because we had that already loaded. So we're going to go ahead and close that out. Let it reload it. Here you go. So we see bug image. Same thing. What do we want to put into it? The image description that we asked the user for. What do we want to get out of it? We want to get out the data. Okay, so now we're really close to being done, but again, this is where it gets a little bit more complex. We're gonna have to put it in an adaptive card that we already started. So I'm gonna send a message, and this is again another cool part of the unified canvas. If I click add here, all these different things that I can do instead of text. I want to send an adaptive card. Okay, earlier today I created that adaptive card that I showed you that we looked at, and so I'm going to grab this and say, here's our card. Now, this in and of itself would not really help much because this is just a static card. What you want to do when you want to start working with data dynamically in an adaptive card is you've got to make this switch from edit JSON to formula. When I do that, I've also got the ability to expand it, which I'm going to want to do. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it in the formula, and I'm going to explain what it's doing. There's not much at all to it. There are basically 2 things that we need to do. We need to make this an array of images because we're giving back 4, and then we need to substitute the actual URL as each item's gone through. So if I just copy over all of this, now if we look at it, what we've got is we're saying for all, we're parsing the JSON, which is topic.data. So remember, that's that big object, right? Then we're specifically saying for all of the data elements in there, right? We're looping through that data array. And then all we're going to do is we're going to create a new adaptive card type image, stretch. The URL is going to be that particular item's URL. And then this nifty select action right here basically says the same thing, where if I click on it, it's going to open up the URL. So now we've got it creating as many images essentially as we need it to. Okay, and then we can go ahead and fill that. And then another thing that we might want to do is maybe somebody wants to create more images. And so if we wanted to, we could do topic management. And for anyone that used PVA 1.0, there was this small little circular node that came off of every item, and you could essentially drag it to redirect things. That is gone in 2, but what we have instead is something called a go-to step. And so what we do is we say we want to go to a step and then we pick it. And so for this particular one, it looks like it is having trouble loading. We'll make this a little bit smaller again for a second. We'll just cancel it, try again. Save it first. So one more time. Save. Topic manage, go to step. Put this. So now you can see here at the very bottom, and we will go ahead and save it again. So it's a redirect saying, we're going to go back to the question. So all this means is that I say bog image, I ask you what you want, I give you images, then I ask you what you want again. Now, if you're going to go this route, and again, beyond sort of the time here, you're going to want to eventually give them another way to get back to the other topic, but it's a fallback topic. So that's where you might create other words to sort of clear that out or sort of rethink how you're going to do this. And I will actually simplify that when I actually test, or when I actually submit the final solution, so that you're able to do that. But okay, so now we want to go ahead and test. So the first thing we want to do is say bog image, because again, we need it to trigger this topic. Okay, so please enter a description of the image you'd like me to create. So would anyone like to give me a description of, actually, you know what, I've got one. Well, no, does anybody have an image they'd like me to create?
Shelf,
A shelf?
a whiskey shelf.
Okay.
Whiskey shelf. Why not?
Okay, we'll say like a photorealistic photo of a whiskey shelf. Okay. All right, so the same thing over here, we're going to be able to see sort of things lighting up. Okay, and we could see for this particular thing, we have a problem, which is good. So this is going to give us a chance to dive in here and look at what is it that we did. You can see it actually triggered the error object. And so we're sort of parsing through here all of these different things. So let's go back to our particular flow and look at what happened. So go here, and we will pull this in. So it's going to be something with that particular HTTP action. You didn't provide an API key. Okay. And we're not going to be able to see the inputs because of the fact that we've got that, right? We talked about that. So we must have made a typo when we were doing the authorization. I think actually just saying that was the problem. I think I used authentication instead of authorization. I flipped them. It should have been authorization. Okay. So now we're going to go in here, and yep, sure enough, that was the problem. Save it. Okay, and then we're just going to restart this conversation. Actually going to save, copy that just in case we have another problem, so we don't have to type that again. All right, there you go. So now we have our whiskey shelves. So pretty cool. If I want to click on one of these, taking to the browser here, and so if I want to save them or do whatever, so we've got 4. Again, we were able to choose 4, and that's, you know, up to us what we want to do and the size with that one as well. And then now I've got one more that I will paste in here just for fun. Let's see. I had Shih Tzus growing up, So this is what I was like to use. Just pick up close photo of a Shih Tzu sitting on a couch watching TV, soft lighting in the background, photorealistic. So, and again, this sort of showcases the fact that we're in the conversation and we're doing multiple. So there you go. We get these Shih Tzus just mesmerized. Just look at that. Just amazing. The eye contact there. So something happened on this one's nose clearly, but yes, so that's it in a nutshell. So now we have the chat. If we want to chat, we can do that back and forth. We saw how we could refer back to the conversation. We have the ability to create images. We've done this all in PVA. If we wanted to, we could just simply deploy this to Microsoft Teams. And at that point, we'd have a bot that in theory we could share with the organization if we wanted to. That would allow them to, again, use those types of capabilities directly in Microsoft Teams. And again, if you did that, the recommendation would be use Azure OpenAI, not OpenAI, because you don't want to worry about what someone may or may not be putting into the actual chat. But that is that in a nutshell. And I'm going to go back really quickly to the PowerPoint, make sure that we didn't cover. Okay, so we've got some references that are in here, but now I want to go back over to Slido. And let's go ahead and play the see the word cloud for a second here. I'm going to pause on this for a minute or so, just give everyone a chance. And so what I'm asking for here is just would love to know when you hear the term generative AI, right? And I think it's safe to say that none of us have been or will be able to escape that term at any point in the near future. What are some of the things that you think about? What are some of the conversations that you're having at your employers, that you're having with your end users? Maybe it's exciting and it's about opportunities and capabilities. Maybe it's being concerned from a security perspective about how that gets utilized. Ethics comes in, labor comes in, all of these other things, legal comes in, okay, so labor force reductions, yep, hallucinations, okay. So those are absolutely great. Yep. Awesome. Go ahead and wait for another message or two here. So these are things that I'm hearing all the time. I want to go ahead and respond to the labor force reduction. One of the, and I feel this to be true, right? One of the things that are being said and that I feel, I'm going to go ahead and change the size of this way. Okay. I thought maybe you're not seeing that here. One of the things about the labor reduction is there's an idea out there that those who embrace artificial intelligence to make themselves more productive are going to benefit greatly, right? And they're going to add even more value to the organizations that they're a part of or will be a part of in the future because of this new superpower that they have. Those that are sort of shying away from generative AI, aren't embracing it, aren't wanting to utilize it, right? They're not going to have the same advantage that their peers who are utilizing it will. It in some ways reminds me a little bit of the move to the cloud years ago, where you had some admins, right, that were managing local infrastructure. Some of them didn't want to learn about the cloud, right? And they sort of looked for reasons not to go and things of that nature. Some of them embraced it. Some of them over time, over years, completely changed careers, perhaps, right? As they got out of managing servers and more into managing services, managing, IaaS, PaaS, things like that. I think that there's going to be some of that, right? It's going to be an opportunity to sort of, potentially pivot or add or expand. So virtual assistants, opportunities, parrots, labor force reduction, marketing automation, and alternative facts. So yeah, very good thoughts. And so thank you again for sharing those. And then lastly, I'm going to jump over now to show Q&A. We don't have any questions right now, but if you do, then they should appear here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this open, and then anybody that wants to submit a question can do so. You can also vote on them if you want to push them up the chain, but I think we've got a few, if any, questions, so I will be happy to answer any and all of them.
We have a question in the room.
Okay, yeah.
You talked a little bit about OpenAI versus Azure OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get a little bit more into the distinction there? Is
Yeah.
the main distinction there that there's better privacy with OpenAI? Or am
I
I
would
just
say
wishing that into existence?
no, better privacy with Azure OpenAI, actually. So
Okay, that's what I meant to say.
Microsoft, yeah, Microsoft's not going to keep your data. Technically speaking, if they think that it's being abused, they can flag content for up to 30 days. If you're a type of organization that under no circumstances wants them to even do that, you can actually apply for an exception. If you're granted that exception, then they literally, no matter what, never keep it. But they won't keep it, and they will not use your data to train their model and make it better. That's the thing that OpenAI states that they will do. That's why there was so much sensitivity around the Samsung developers putting in code, thinking like they just essentially brought their code to the public in some sense, right? Potentially, right? It could appear down the road because of that. With Azure OpenAI, I like to think of it as the enterprise version of OpenAI. Azure or Microsoft and OpenAI have been great in their partnership about getting things there quickly, right? It's a little bit delayed, but it's pretty fast. And you've got that again, sort of the enterprise Microsoft security. You can deploy these resources to particular regions. So when you're thinking about like GDPR, data privacy, all the different regulations, again, you're going to be able to deal with that much better in Azure. So great question, though.
It looks like we have a hand up in the chat. Tim, if you want to unmute yourself.
Unmuted, Tim here.
Mhm.
Just wondering, looking at this and knowing of a kind of an effort called semantic kernel, which is a
Yep.
suite of things. Do you see that maybe PVA can actually work with the semantic kernel in a similar way, or is there? Or
Yeah.
not?
So have you heard of LangChain too, Tim, by chance?
Yep.
Okay. So the answer to that is yes, and we're doing some of that now. Whether it's semantic kernel or LangChain, these are additional libraries that essentially simplify processes of being able to talk back and forth. And so what we've done in our particular use case is created Azure functions and Python Azure functions specifically. Python, one of the interesting things for me in my career with really getting into AI has been the data science background is heavily favoring Python. So a lot of the libraries you're seeing come out or being utilized are Python. So sort of jumped onto that and embraced it. And so, now the Azure, the one that you mentioned, right? The sentiment kernel that it has
Semantic kernel.
semantic
John
kernel.
made
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. With semantic kernel, I think there's a couple different flavors like C# and Python. But yeah, if you utilize those in an Azure function, right, instead of calling OpenAI directly, then think about you create an Azure function, right, that uses semantic kernel or uses LangChain, and then uses those to call them behind the scenes. Then everything we just did, instead of doing that, right, our HTTP call would actually be to our Azure function. And then that's what we
Sweet.
do. All the
Yeah,
heavy
I
lifting.
see. I was seeing. Well, I got it. That's how you're going to pass your credentials, whatever.
Mhm.
And then just wondering, thinking of this thing internally, but basically, if you had a service which was to the public,
Mhm.
and you resold this, and you basically, built on some, you're on top of your costs, so you can make a profit. But
Yeah.
how the whole notion of these token usages and the costs associated with each usage. I wonder, is anybody taking this into account in our thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I will say over the past 4 months, OpenAI and Microsoft, I think, have reduced cost twice. The cost of these APIs continues to get lower and lower. I really don't think that's necessarily going to be, a prohibitor. And obviously, when we think about things like Copilot and $30 a month per user.
Actually, I was thinking more in lines with everything is in my regard is it's got a very good bright future on the cost picture as well as what it does. But my thing was more in turn with if you were to resell some of these things, like you 30, yeah, you have to know what your cost is so you can rebill your customer. So
Yeah.
So and typically they're billing on a cost per token or whatever, so many tokens for so much.
Ah.
And so I just wonder Anybody got a handle on where that's going or who's doing it or how we're going to get at it?
Yep, two options, and I've gotten one of these recommendations directly from Microsoft. One is you could create a Azure OpenAI resource per customer. If you wanted to do that, put that in a resource group, right? So that you could have costs flowing. So you could just say, hey, legal department, all of your usage is coming from this resource. And so it's really easy. I just bill you for whatever came in. If you have too many, you might want to use Azure API management on top of it. Basically, an additional layer you put above OpenAI to give you an ability to see who's calling what. But I would look at one of those two options essentially as a way to separate costs, because you're right, you're ultimately going to have cost on, and you're likely to have cost on embeddings too, which again, when we get into sort of what can we do with content and how can we do additional searches and something called the retrieval augmented generation pattern, which I'm happy to talk about after I get to these questions, you're going to likely use more things. And again, that just leads to more costs, although they're incredibly inexpensive. But yeah, that would be a good way to separate out the cost so that you could just bill back.
Pretty good idea until everything catches up where we can get a handle on the metrics as these things are going through the day.
Yeah.
But good suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Great question. Okay, so looking at these here, we have, will the creator be able to go back and see the secret? So an Azure secret and an Azure Key Vault is something, if you have access or permission to view the secret, you can't see it. I will tell you, when you create the API key in OpenAI, that you get a chance to copy it right when you create it. You'll never be able to see it again. So, from that standpoint, you might have to go back and do it again. But if you create a key in Azure's Key Vault and you forget it and you need to go back and get it, then you can. But again, the nice thing about the Key Vault is that you don't really have to know what it is. It's just having permission to the key so that you can pull it into something like a flow. So, and it may seem small. I think a lot of examples and a lot of people get started probably put it in directly, but just sort of trying to think about through, like, my recommendation is go ahead and start thinking about that securely, now, just so that you've got it from the start. And again, even if you were using Azure OpenAI, it's going to have two keys by default. You can circulate them and whatnot, but if you put one of those in the Key Vault and then control who has access to that resource directly, or being able to refresh those keys, you'll be in a good position where people are able to use it without knowing exactly what the value is. So it's on that one. If I didn't answer any of these questions as we go through here, feel free to put another one in and raise hands. So how helpful do you think the chat AI features help you in your daily work? How many lines or interactions do you have with OpenAI or being chat every day? So that's a great question. I will say, for me in particular, I use it frequently. I think I know people that probably use it more than me, and some people that use it less than me. I think it depends on what I'm doing in any given day. Right. If I'm in meetings all day long, right, it may not. If I'm coding and, I mentioned picking up Python, right, and I have a question about how do I do this in Python, I could do it in C# or I could do it in TypeScript, how to do it there. Those are helpful. If looking for sort of brainstorming, those are helpful. If I'm looking for, just a little bit of fun, I might actually start up a chat. I've done things like done movie quizzes. I've done like NBA basketball quizzes. Like, I love Jeopardy. And so, I've used it for things like that, not necessarily anything, but just to, get a chance to have a little bit of fun, maybe on a Friday, and, asking it to give me movies in the form of emojis and guessing what the answers are and things like that. So it depends. The one thing I will say that I'm, adamant about is not having it create content and just taking it as is. None of the content you saw today in the presentation, what came from any OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, it all came from me. I think it's a great way to draft content, but I think that there's a danger if people start to say, well, I'm just going to have it or I'm going to have it create the content, I'm just going to take it as is. I don't think that's the right way to go about it, right? I think, to me personally, my view on it, still, there needs to be a human element to it. There needs to be a review to it. Can maybe give you ideas and brainstorm, but that's, yeah. So hopefully that answers that second question on there. And then
that just is there's a couple attorneys that kind of just went to jail for, having AI generate the citations, and the citations didn't exist, and they presented that to the court.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's again, it's a tool. In my view, it's a tool to help us, right? Not to replace us. And, the more people put it in front of them, as a way to replace what they do. I mean, I think that's where one of the main dangers is, right? Not blindly accepting a response. And, I did a demo months ago, I believe it was back in March, and it was on the Microsoft PNP. It was on one of those calls. And I did a demo. It was similar to this, but this actually showed how I built everything, but it was similar. And I asked it during the demo for the 17th US president and got an answer right, went on. At the end of the conversation, somebody was like, Matt, that wasn't the 17th president. It was wrong, And again, it's just a good reminder that it isn't. You can't necessarily, just go, oh, well, it came back with it. It's kind of like we used to joke, like, well, if it's on the internet, it has to be true, right? It's if AI created it, it has to be true. No, I mean, I think there has to be some thoughtfulness on our side to be able to make sure that it is going to make sense. But I do think it can help. I do think it can be very powerful. Having said that. And I know the models have changed, honestly, quite a bit from even back in March to now. I don't think we would get that answer incorrect again. So the next one, what are your thoughts on companies such as Google, in parentheses, trash, firing their ethics committee to push their AI forward? My personal opinion on this, and ethics is critical, right, to being able to effectively, properly, responsibly utilize AI. So I can't speak. I don't have the background on what that was exactly, but I would say that anyone that is looking to leverage AI, right, within their company, if they're looking to leverage AI to start a business, that you have to think about things ethically. Again, to me, this is my very much personal view. Ethics should be a part of it. It's a lot of content, right, in this large language model, that inevitably has bias based on, the creators of the content, et cetera. And so, and again, we've seen the ability right now for incorrect answers to be presented. So I think that you've got to really think about the right way to use it in a way that benefits people and doesn't hurt people. Great questions, though. Any other questions in the room, online? Anything at all?
You were unmuting yourself a couple of times. I wasn't sure if you had a question.
Matt, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a general question. Is we started using Azure OpenAI in our tenant, and we're using the chat playground. And when we built that, and when, for example, I gave an example saying, "Hey, who won the last Super Bowl?" It gives us the result. The response says something Buccaneers in 2021. Whereas if I go to the Bing chat, and if I ask the same question, it's able to come back with 2023. Is there any kind of a difference in that? Because I know in can you talk about it? Like, I mean, I know Azure uses ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, and I'm guessing that Bing uses 4. I don't think that makes a difference, but
it's actually not that. This is a great question. It reminds me about the RAG, the retrieval augmented generation pattern I mentioned. Thank you for asking this. I can take a minute here to talk about that. The reason that Bing had, so let me step back a minute. The OpenAI models, right, were trained in 2021. It's around September of 2021. So when you mentioned the fact that, like, if you look for, it was doing a lot of NBA stuff with like points per game, or it was asking it who is the 3-point career leader, right? It doesn't know about things that happened last year or this year. And so you're not going to get up-to-date content. When or if they'll retrain those models, I don't think that's going to happen. It's expensive to train models. It's expensive to fine tune, right? Because you can inject your data if you want to into your own personal model. But what this retrieval augmented generation does is it says, we're going to look at our information first. And what Bing does is it looks at Bing search, right? So you say who won the last Super Bowl. Bing search looks for the last Super Bowl winners. What it does is when it sends the question back to GPT, it gives it that additional information. So it'll say who won the last Super Bowl, utilize the below information to assist you in answering this question. In that instant, in that particular query, now the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs won the 2023 the 2023 Super Bowl is in there. And so that's why Bing Chat is going to be able to tell you the Chiefs won the last Super Bowl, because it's injecting, that's like that retrieval augmented, right? It's injecting that information into it. And one of the most common questions I get is organizations that want to inject their data. And again, fine tuning is a way to do that, but not the recommended way, even from Microsoft. It's the same thing with the retrieval augmented generation. And if you've seen, PVA has something called the boost feature, where you can connect it to a website or you can connect it to an internal SharePoint site. It works the same exact way. It's basically saying, it's like doing a search before the GPT search, right? So it's like combining sort of traditional searches with GPT. But if you give GPT new information, right? I mean, it's a large language model, right? So if it has newer information available to it, it's going to be able to pull that out. But yes, that's why it's not about, the underlying GPT model. It's not about Bing having that information and one not. None of them do. They haven't been updated in almost 2 years. It's the fact that somebody's injecting content first. And that's how, really, if you think about Copilot and how it's going to understand, like, what are your meetings? When are you free next? What's the last document I worked on? That's how that works, right? They're going to be looking, and before they send the prompt to OpenAI, they're going to inject it with that context and then say, based on this, what's the answer?
So I'm better off using the Bing Chat APIs that are coming in the near future, which will first do the Bing search and then go to the ChatGPT, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you.
going to, yep, absolutely. You're going to get newer results, yep, using that method. So the next question was, if that is the case, then is it safe to say a large language model, once completed, is already obsolete as new days? Yeah, I mean, in essence, yes, right? And this was one of my first observations using it. It's funny because things like LangChain didn't exist in 2021, and it is a great pair programmer, but then you realize that it doesn't know about what's gone on, right, the last 2 years. And frankly, all of us know in technology, 2 years is a huge amount of time. And so it is, but that's where that sort of augmented capability comes into play. And again, I think you've seen Microsoft, start to bring that in, and you've seen OpenAI bring that in with their plugins and their plugins specifically to Bing. So I think that's the way that large language models help us with a lot of their history, but then allow us to augment with the data. Because if you tried to fine tune a model, right, think about with your data, even if you automated it, 30 minutes after, it's like I said, it is expensive to fine tune a model. 30 minutes after you do it, now it doesn't have data that just got created. So I don't think retraining the model repeatedly is the right way. And I think that's exactly why that OpenAI hasn't retrained their model. I think augmenting it is the way that you get the newest information in there. Great questions. Any other questions? Oh, I knew one here. I'm sorry, I didn't see that at the top. How would you comment on the fact that GitHub and OpenAI use the open source codes to train the AI for GitHub Copilot? So I think that, to me, using open source code to train it, I think it makes sense, honestly, right? It's kind of part of open source, right? It's available for everyone. I'm not sure if I'm maybe understanding that question correctly, but I think that it should only be utilizing data that's publicly available to it, right? And a lot of the pair programming where it can help with are if you get back to like syntax on particular languages and whatnot, then those are things that aren't necessarily changing as often. Although if you look at different versions of .NET and C#, then they obviously do change over time. But I think using open source code is a part of it. I know Facebook's Llama 2 large language model, I don't know if everyone saw that this week, they've announced it's available in Azure. And so it is open source, right? And so there are going to be other options, right? Frankly, if you're looking at different large language models and you're not wanting to use OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, there are going to be different options for that. I think GitHub Copilot's awesome though, but it also, like I said, it will hallucinate because ask it about a new library that it didn't know about and it has no idea. And it will, as I found out the first time I really utilized it, it will do a great job at guessing the names of properties or methods that might be helpful that aren't real. And so, yeah, and then you run the code and realize this method doesn't exist. And so, because the first time I tried it, I was like, this is amazing. Like, wow, like you wrote all the code for me. Absolutely none of it worked because it had no idea what LangChain was. It just knew that if I said I wanted to convert something, from binary 64 to this format or whatever, it would just say, well, there's probably a method called, convert. So, yeah.
I had a similar experience with SharePoint settings. I asked it if there was a way to do something in SharePoint that I was pretty sure there wasn't a way to do, but I just wanted to see if I could use ChatGPT to confirm it.
Yeah.
And it made up the answer, but it did it in a way that was very convincing. And I went into the settings and dug down, and it was like, it should be right here. And the option that ChatGPT was saying just didn't exist as one of the options in the setting.
Yeah. No, it's going to be critical when you think about, actions to be, and if we're creating the actions that'll help APIs, right, that we call, but if it's outdated, it doesn't work. I know I was working on a POC for fun where I was going to describe basically a SharePoint list formatting example that I wanted. Every time it would spit out code that looked great, but it inevitably never worked, right? And I will say a lot of times if you get one error and then you say, no, that's not right. It created this error. It'll say, oh, so sorry, you're right. That was my bad. And it'll give you new code. And maybe it works the next time, maybe it doesn't. But that is where if that outdated information is not, it can really in a lot of ways be harmful, right? If somebody doesn't realize it's outdated, because again, what I would have told you in 2021 to do with SharePoint, it may not be what I'm telling you in 2023.
I think it's almost worse than it being outdated though, because I think what's happening is that OpenAI doesn't like to say I don't know, or it doesn't like to say that no, you can't do that. So instead of saying you can't do that, it seems to try to say if you could do that, this is how you would do that.
Yeah. Yep. And prompt engineering, I'm not going to say that it takes all that away, can help, but putting in a prompt saying, not to provide intentionally false information. What we noticed initially without something like that is you could ask it like, what's today? How's the weather in New York? Things like that. It would always give a very believable answer that was inevitably never correct. And when we put in the prompt to say, don't know, then all of a sudden it started changing it. What's today? I'm an AI system. I don't know when today is, right? What's the weather in New York? I'm an AI system. I am not connected to the internet. I don't know what the weather's like in New York, right? So, I mean, there are things like that you're definitely going to want to do to help get rid of some of those hallucinations. And again, they've been very effective, but that's certainly something to think about because it is great at putting together great looking answers that aren't always right. And I think again, that's one of the main dangers, right? Is that if you're not aware of that, you could just take it as is and say, oh, here's the answer, right? But no, you got to understand, is that really the right answer? And one thing that we've done recently with it, and again, you sort of understand large language models and, its relationship with text and where it's looking is citing sources, updating the prompt to say, if you're able to cite a URL, right, that this information came from, to include it in the response, right? And it will. But if we go back to that idea that it was 2021, how many website URLs do you think that worked in 2021 work in 2023? How many website URLs do you think have content that was in 2021 that's in there in 2023? And so we've actually injected sort of an asterisk, kind of a warning anytime it creates a URL outside of the process, just to say like these are from URLs included content from 2021 that may not be relevant at this time. So it's a good reminder for people because again, I think it was trained on a lot of data, right? It may appear to know who your company is and what your company does, and that's because it's looking at something from 2 years ago. So, that's definitely important to keep in mind too. Any other questions? And if you think of something after the fact, again, my information's in the deck. Definitely feel free to look me up, send me a note. Love to chat about this stuff.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, thank you. One quick plug. I will be actually in Boston in October for the New England Collab Days. So I'll actually be talking all about prompt engineering. So that will be a presentation I'll have at that time. So if you were there tonight and you're there in October, please do hit me up. All right. Thanks, everyone.
So moving forward, we have a few upcoming sessions coming up throughout the year. So we decided to not do a formal session in August, just being the summer months and all. But we are going to do a social gathering on August 9th. It's going to be co-sponsored with LMS 365 and Turn Digital. We were just talking a little bit about this before we kicked off the meeting, but we are looking for a venue that could accommodate just drinks and appetizers in this area. If you know of any, let's talk. Then in September, we have Rachel talking to us a little bit about decision fatigue user experience in SharePoint and how that all ties together. So Rachel works for Thermo Fisher and comes with a lot of great experiences that she'll be sharing with us in September. We do have an open call for speakers for October and November. So if you're interested in speaking, or you might know someone that might be interested, let's chat. Love to learn a little bit more about what you do in the space and kind of your lessons learned. We'll put a nice QR code up here as well for anyone that wants to take a quick scan to submit that. So upcoming community events. We like to share some things that are coming up either here in the Boston area or within the US. But coming up next in August in Seattle is 365 EduCon. So this is the rebranded SharePoint Fest, since it's more than just SharePoint these days. And we do have an exclusive promo code for our user group. There's also the Power Platform Conference coming up in October. A few of us were talking about that in the beginning as well. I'm going to be at that one. So if you're going, let me know. We can meet up there. To Matt's point, Collab Days New England is coming up October 21st. It's going to be held in this building. I'm not sure if they've opened it up for registrations yet, but they have just announced the speaker lineup. So definitely check out the website if you're interested there. There's another 365 EduCon coming up later this year in Chicago. And of course, we have the Microsoft Ignite conference this November. And this one's going to be virtual. And I've recently heard that it will likely be in Seattle in person as well. Are we missing any events? Does anyone know of any other events you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just threw one in the chat. There's Community Days in New York City. That's what's for Play SharePoint Saturday. So there's Collab Days and Community Days. Apparently 2 different factions.
Yep, next up. So you're absolutely right. So there is another one coming up. I think it's next. Is it next Friday or next
29th.
Saturday?
It's 29th. It's next Saturday. It costs you $20 if you want lunch. Otherwise, it's free.
Very cool. Thanks for that, Deb. Of course, there are a number of other community calls via PNP. So if you go to pnp.github.io, you can find these and many, many more. There's additional resources within the community. Of course, these slides are available to all of our members. We do have a few other user groups in the area. Rhode Island one is run by DRC. The Granite State one is actually getting rebooted, and I think they've been more active in the last couple of months. So if you're living in North Shore or New Hampshire.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Jim Wilcox is doing it with Dan Shabaka from Skyterra, my new employer. And it's going to be held at Skyterra, which is in Nashua, Trafalgar Square in Nashua. And I believe they're trying to get an August meeting going. So I'll get you the info as soon as I find out.
And then, of course, there's a few Azure user groups in the area. And Paul Swider runs the Boston Power Apps and Power Automate user group as well. All right, this being a community, is anyone running into any problems with any technologies? Or have you recently solved a really interesting problem that you'd like to share?
I got one. So my new colleague and I were trying to figure out how to copy and move a list from one tenant to another. And in the old days, you template the list, you make it a .stp file, and then you're going to upload it to that template gallery, and then you'd have it available in the new tenant. Tempted to do that, except the template gallery does not give admins or owners or anybody else permission to actually upload anything into the template gallery. You get this, you gotta request permission and there's no way that it can get approved. So every time you approve it, and then the next time you try to upload a document, you get that same, you need to get approved, you gotta request approval for the library. Anybody have any other method to migrate a list or library from one SharePoint site to another?
Power Automate.
We should say tenant to another.
Yeah, Power Automate. Just move it.
Power Automate.
Yeah.
Deb, I'd also check out the PnP PowerShell commands. It's
Okay.
been a while. I don't recall if this was for online or on-prem, but there was some ability
It's
to
online.
export a list and import it again.
All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Or use a tool like ShareGate, of course.
Yeah, well, not everybody's got that kind of money.
Export an Excel file and import to the new list.
Well, the problem with Excel is that you have to actually, if you have any kind of a choice column, you have to have the data filled in the Excel file. Otherwise, it doesn't recognize the choice columns. It automatically puts them as single line text. People pickers don't work well. They don't get uploaded well. So I was trying to avoid having to do any kind of configuration. I just want to move it from one to another and boom, it's there.
You could also write a script in PowerShell that could do it relatively easily.
Okay.
How many rows and how wide?
That we're figuring out. I think it's gonna be pretty a lot of columns. Should be no rows. It should be a blank list. List. But a lot of columns.
I mean, people picker is an issue, but I've done on the select list, I've just allowed any value so I can import it, and then later I define my select list.
I was trying to avoid having to define it.
You don't have to. You can import the data and then add. You can just, I write scripts to figure it out later. But
Gotcha. Yeah.
If it's a blank list, then you can just export it as a content type. And it'll export to a CSV file that you can then import into your destination tenant. Done.
Okay. Ooh.
That's super simple.
Ooh. All right, Mike, I owe you a drink.
What
Awesome.
about Tim? What about Tim for the question of number of rows? So we're all on the same page, huh?
I guess I'll owe a bunch of you guys drinks. You'll have to come to the next Granite State user group meeting.
Okay.
Demo, I should say.
All right. So just
Thank you,
keeping
guys.
things moving forward. Does anyone else have any other questions, problems, any interesting solutions? Is everyone's environments working flawlessly?
I just want to say, because we definitely kind of towards the end of this session poo-pooed on OpenAI a lot. I actually had a great win for OpenAI just a couple of days ago, in that I got it to, I was working very late at night and I had about 40 new columns that I had to create. And I had them all sketched out in a Excel document, and I just asked Power Automate to write me a script, or ChatGPT to write me a PowerShell script that would connect to the Excel file that I had and create the columns for me. And I told it to also add any of the columns that I would need for configurations on the Excel side. So I got it to write both what was needed for Excel headers and a PowerShell script. And I had to adjust it, I think, about 3 times, and it worked beautifully. It was awesome. So
yours,
big win. The whole process maybe took me about 15 minutes. And also I'm walking away with that with a PowerShell script and an Excel template that I can use over and over again in 100 other different occasions. So it took me less than the time for the work that I had at hand to make that. So good stuff.
Awesome. So keeping things moving forward, want to thank our sponsors one more time for keeping this group alive. We're going for, I believe we just hit our 9-year mark this past May. So I think when we first started this group, it was kind of a joke that the cloud's going to be the future for SharePoint and all the related technologies. but it was out there, and it was Mike, myself, Dave Losey, and Chris Portlick that got us going, and here we are, still going strong. So we have had a number of sponsors over the years. We definitely want to acknowledge them and thank them for their support as we've continued to push this group forward.
Those companies.
I'm going to stop the recording now while we go into the next session. We don't want this on YouTube in case someone is looking for work. And